Hi there, good afternoon. So we're doing a presentation today on endangered landrace cannabis varieties, the urgent need for conservation and the potential for new discovery. Everything we're meeting here today about, everything from the investment to the patient result, it all starts with a seed. And along with my partner, the Landrace warden in Pakistan, we are taking what steps we can to help in the conservation, preservation, documentation and further availability of some landrace genetics which are under threat and being lost from the world. To give everyone some background to the talk we'll be doing today, so cannabis arrived on the planet around 28 million years ago as it diverged from hops in the Tibetan Plateau, and natural climatic conditions in South and Central Asia initiated the divergence in the wild populations. The phytochemical divergence was driven further by man's interaction and man's selective breeding. So a landrace can be considered the oldest type of plant cultivar. It's one which is adapted to its own needs in harmony with its environment. And the soil type, the nutrition availability, water type, the available ripening time of the season all play an influence on the development of a landrace variety. Within a landrace population, you will find a much greater genetic diversity, the allelic diversity, than you'll find in a commercial variety, while maintaining a distinct identity by which it can be recognized. Some examples would be, this is the Hindu Kush mountains in northern Pakistan. There's also like Malawi gold, we have Panama red, Colombian gold, lamb's bread from Jamaica. These are all names of landrace cannabis varieties that have evolved over time. And some people have the impression that landrace means completely naturally developed without interaction from man, and that's obviously not the case because man has selected seeds to take them to other parts of the world where they then interact with the local environment and become a new variety. So this is in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Here is quite a variety shown in this population, and it is the history of man and plant to interact and move seeds around the world. The gene pools are then maintained both by the open pollination in the wild and further by man selecting, saving seeds, planting, and this maintains a wider genetic diversity in the population. This is also extremely important for the resilience of cannabis, the long-term survival of cannabis as a species. Sometimes new pests, new diseases turn up and become a threat to a plant variety, and we often have to look back in the gene pools, and going to landraces can be a great place to increase the resilience. Landraces also have a strong history of the various cultural interactions around the world, that you could say there's a case to be made for the co-evolutionary symbiotic relationship in the development of mankind and cannabis on the planet. And when we conserve landrace varieties and conserve a wider genetic diversity, this opens the door to the opportunity for future discoveries as we understand more about new compounds that will be discovered and can be brought forward for new application. The threats to landrace populations, one of the biggest one is from hybridization. And of course, hybrids have their merits for improved yield or stability, uniformity, and the drive for commercialization pushes many producers, of course, down that road. And that is the biggest threat, as we see populations from all over the world just being interbred to maximize what seems like commercial opportunity at that time, and further damages the genetic diversity. Modern agriculture, if we move towards synthetic fertilizers, getting extra yield, pesticides and such, this also has further increased pressures on the population. So here is a map put together with various specimens of wild type. These are herbarium samples of wild type cannabis populations. So these can be considered really pre-domestication gene pool, and these are from over various times these samples have been made. The red circles going up to the northern part there, these are typically, you'll get more CBD dominant in those varieties, and these would be best sort of understood as like an Asian hemp type of line. The Asian hemp varieties, the ones that were used traditionally for fiber in Asia, traditionally had higher levels of THC. It's only the European, what we call true sativa, that was actually always more CBD dominant, and the interbreeding of Asian hemp and European hemp has also contributed to some higher levels of THC. It's been popping up in the hemp species. The green triangles going down to the south there, these can be considered the ancestral population of all drug type cannabis. And I say all drug type, covering what we call sativa to indica, narrow leaf drug variety through to wide leaf drug type variety. The different colors here are shown as the floristic zones, and you can see right on this central point here, and the changes of the floristic zones is where the climatic conditions initiated divergence in the wild populations before man took them further elsewhere. So cannabis is an extremely adaptive and an expressive plant. And if you take identical clones and put them in different environments, you get different results. And this has been shown. There was a study in 2020 where they took hemp clones, planted them at 300 meter and then at 1,300 meter in different altitudes, and it produced a different range of compounds, a different ratio of within the compounds. There was higher levels of flavonoids at the higher altitude. There was extra CBD in that particular experiment. And what's a nice point of reference on that is that was 2020, that was shown in a PubMed published paper, but there's actually a Scottish doctor from 1883 who's in PubMed recalling a conversations he had with doctors in India from the 1850s, and they were saying that the plant when grown in the plains was therapeutically inferior to the plant when grown in the hills. Now, they didn't have identical clones to compare that, but 150 years later or so, that was then demonstrated in an experiment. This is Kalat in Baluchistan. That's like what we hear of the tribal regions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, some of the driest regions on the planet. And you can see I've got other copies of the photos. I've got some available as well. That there's nothing else grows here. The weeds struggle to grow. There's literally nothing on the hills. On the government maps, there's nothing grows there officially, and they have these cannabis plantations, which also makes it hard to preserve them in cooperation with the government when the government doesn't recognize they are there. But for all the great potential, the drought resistance of these type varieties are unlike anything you will see anywhere else. So Baluchistan is part of Pakistan, but the tribal areas don't really cooperate with the government and they do their own thing. They also feel they don't get the support from the government, so that's the situation where that falls. Pakistan is a country of special interest because all types of cannabis from wide leaf drug to narrow leaf drug, can be found in Pakistan. And these should have been referred to as indica and afghanica respectively, but a bit too late for that now, I think. They're best thought of as the non-EU hemp gene pool of cannabis varieties. Pakistan also contains the wild type Asian hemp varieties pre-domestication, and some of the remaining pre-domestication wild type drug type up near the Azad Kashmir region in the Himalayas especially. So 30 years ago, the genetic markers in the populations, both of what could be found at source and what was being experienced by consumers in the West, there was a greater separation in the genetic markers of what we call indica sativa than there is now. That's eroded to the point where we all, or most of us know, this is not scientifically accurate in any way to use the indica sativa term in any genetic sense, though gene pools which still represent those expressions do exist, though they are under great threat and in need of conservation. So the narrow leaf drug variety, which I showed you here in the green triangles, the narrow leaf drug, the sativa, the longer flowering, the ones that are found in the tropical regions, that type of plant variety, you could say, had more success earlier on, where around 1,000 years ago, that gene pool made its way to South Africa. A few hundred years later, it was taken over to South America by slaves on the ships, made its way over generations up to America. But the the populations of Central Asia and Afghanistan and this part of Pakistan, it's only in the last 50 years that they've actually come to the attention of Western breeders and been interfered with and moved around, both from those being taken to South America now, and then also we do also have reports from the 1970s when Mexican gold seeds had been taken by someone into Afghanistan. And then there was reports in the 80s documented when seeds from Afghanistan were moved up into the hills to the Kashmir region to increase the yield because, again, the pressure was on the commercialization of what they were doing. But that is the history of man, to interact with seeds and move them around. But when we speak to a family in the tribal regions, and like here, this is Dash Desert also in Baluchistan, some wild expressions turn up in the populations, and again, there's no other weeds, nothing else manages to grow here. When we speak to a family and the farmer has seeds from his father, who got seeds from his father, and the whole family garden is maintained in that way through generations, and they don't know of any other reports where they've brought in seeds in any recent time anyone knows of. It's just unrealistic to say that all of the populations have being contaminated by modern wild skunk pollen or such. That's just not realistic. To give context as well, Pakistan has twice the land area of Germany. And a lot of the tribal regions, they don't all communicate with each other. You need translators between different, there's so many isolated regions that they're hard to reach, but these varieties do still exist. My partner was in Afghanistan last year at harvest time documenting some of the landrace population there, because the Taliban has now issued a crackdown on cannabis growing in Afghanistan. I think it was actually issued the statement via Twitter that there will be no cannabis or hash production in Afghanistan by law of the Taliban this year. And again, that threatens where a lot of these varieties, which are being used in modern medical therapeutic value, come from these sources. And we still have untapped gene pools where we haven't fully utilized everything that's available. And then we have things like the Taliban ordering the farmers to no more production. They're given alternatives of crops, but again, that threatens the local populations and further discovery. So my partner had been documenting some of the varieties and some of the areas we know the farmers will not be planting next year. Last year and the last 2 years in Pakistan, we've seen extreme floods. And there's some areas where the farmers have had 2 years of floods where they've never had any problem with flooding before. And they had prepared a backup for one bad season, but to have 2 washout seasons, they then have family heirloom seeds where they've got a few left, and they don't have enough to do the whole to plant them out again. So there's also opportunity there to get involved for preservation. With landrace variety, we see the plant and the interaction and the production and the use very much in harmony with nature. It's how it's evolved. This is Tirra Valley in Hindu Kush, northern Pakistan, or the temperate region there. And this is a typical sort of a family farm here in Hindu Kush, where it's widely grown. And the harvest is very much in sort of harmony with the season. So this is where it's harvested and it's bunched up, and then the farmers, they wait. The indication is the first snowfall of the season. So when the first snowfall comes, that's considered the cold snap, where it then goes in for trichome separation on the screens, with the low temperature aiding the separation of the trichome heads. Don't ask me about moisture meter levels on the produce there. That's what they've been doing for some time. So that's what's going on there. We also lose knowledge as we lose some of these local populations, and there are some, you could say, handed down wisdoms, and it's amazing how many of these old handed down wisdoms get proven later by science. Of course, you have to be careful not to follow the bro science, as I say, but many of these old wisdoms do eventually get shown out when there's been a reason why they've been preserved. So here in the Dash Desert in Baluchistan, one thing, if you look in the background of some of these photographs, you'll see some, like over here, you see some males that are still hanging around in the crop, but here's a big male sticking out there. And also, again, check the drought resistance. Look how cracked the ground is down here at the bottom. Look how lush the plant is and how cracked the ground is. It's amazing situation. So I was asking, and other people asked me, why is there still males in the field if this is for production of trichome. And this is what the local farmers have said from their experience in these regions. They have said that if they remove 100% of the males and the weather is right on the edge of what the plant can tolerate, there's more chance, they say, of the plants wilting and not making it to the end of the season. They found that when the females have had a light pollination, they seem to go the extra mile to survive through to the end. So in extreme conditions, they will trade off what would sound like an increased yield for the benefit and survival of the crop as a whole. Due to issues like that, there then again becomes lack of economic incentive to preserve immediately, or for farmers to do, let's say, old school production in that way. But then again, as we face all the challenges of drought around the world and need genetics to deal with new threats, there's maybe not the immediate economic incentive, but there's the clear long-term case in the value. On the flip side, with genetics, another thing that's been observed is that some of the modern varieties, what's been coming out of Spain and Holland typically over the last 30 years, sort of prior to the advent of the newer production in America and Canada, a lot of those sort of classic varieties, they've been taken and tested in places like the Dash Desert, or they've been tried in the Caribbean, and places where you would think they may be happy to grow. And there's been surprising rates of failure and illness and disease show up in a lot of these modern varieties because they've been years of indoor breeding and they've lost their resilience to go back into environments that you think they would naturally be suitable for. Prohibition continues to remain a threat to the preservation of genetics. As we see, the Taliban are ordering no production there. They have their own reasons for that. We have the history of mankind in places like South America, South Africa, spraying pesticides from helicopters, trying to wipe out local populations of plants, and all of that is a great threat to the preservation of what this plant really could do and to benefit us as a species. So here, this is a violin plot distribution of more than 80,000 flower samples in the US. I think this is from 2020, these were taken. And this is, we've got Alaska, California, Florida, Michigan, Oregon, and Washington. And this is THC, CBD, CBG, CBN, CBC, CBDV, THCV on the end there. Yeah, that's so there's not much representation in the rest of the cannabinoids. So from more than 80,000 flower samples available, more than 95% were the typical sort of 20% THC variety, 2.2% of them were the 1-to-1 ratio, and less than 2% of them were CBD dominant. And as you can see, there's not much representation on anything else on the other compounds there. By comparison, if we look here at analysis, this is a wild type feral, what we call the variety Himalayensis, those green triangles, the pre-domestication drug type cannabis. It's also called variety Kaffir. So as we can see here, this is a CBD dominant variety. There's a CBD and there's a THC. Okay, but when we go and replicate this in our typical modern medicine variety, that's all we've done. But when we look in the Landrace variety, we've got this beautiful 1-to-3 ratio locked in there, the CBDV to CBD and the THCV to THC. And there are some other things to be made about the CBC ratio to other compounds and some other factors like that, which have been overlooked. And although we don't have the exact specifics to nail down what all that means, these issues are articulated over and over of people saying what cannabis has changed or things are different, and it's not only about the THC level has gone up. That would be a great mistake to think it's only about that. This is only one example of a wild type variety, but this case is very representative of what I'm talking about, what has changed, and this is also what we hope to contribute to, both in raising awareness and helping to bring back some genetics. This is Gilgit-Baltistan up in northern Pakistan. Baltistan is sort of part of Pakistan, but also doesn't really cooperate with the government there. They do trade more with the Chinese side of the Himalayas. Communication's difficult up in these regions as well. And the interest of the family farms up there is they don't do any commercial production or export. So this is not like the Hindu Kush where they're exporting tons of hashish elsewhere and maybe some seeds are also going. These are small family farms that still do old, just traditional use. This is up about 8,000 feet. Then it goes up into the snow-capped mountains here, like 10, 12,000 feet. There's cannabis samples and varieties that are growing up there. And one example I'd also invite you to think about in consideration of where this all fits into the bigger picture. When we think about let's say the great success of how CBD has been in the last 10 years, whether that's success for patients changing their health, what it's been for the opportunity for industry, how it's brought all these new situations together, it has been a significant event in our industry, the advent of CBD's introduction to society. I'd like to draw your attention to this point. In 1980, there were clinical trials in Brazil on children with epilepsy, and it was proven successful that CBD treated epilepsy in clinical trials. And nothing happened from 1980 until 2012, until two parents from Colorado went on television and told the world about giving their child unregulated cannabis extract, and that changed everything. The human experience resonated more than the data had been sitting there and had not been acted on. We need the data, but how to explain that void? There was a clinical trial in 1980, and it took two parents saying, look, we're breaking the law, giving our child unregulated extract, and now it has launched a lot of things. So I'd also like to invite you to think about some of the concepts I'm trying to put forward in these ratios and other compounds, or the need for the preservation. You know, imagine it was 2006 and I was here standing trying to explain to you the significance of CBD and the great boom that CBD is going to be over the next 10 to 20 years. You wouldn't be able to conceptualize what I was trying to explain if it was 2006 we were talking about CBD, even though the data existed. Nor would you believe that what would change everything would be two parents telling the world about unregulated extract. But that's the value of I would say, the human experience. And that's also something that resonates throughout this industry, from the experience from patients to the whole human-plant interaction and probably how it's going to respond and develop and satisfy our needs going forward. And as I said earlier, there are people who talk about how varieties have changed, and they talk about the old school varieties, and I could only best summarize that as there are data points, but that human experience is not to be overlooked because it is the history of human cannabis interaction. So I hope I've inspired you to look a bit further into the cannabis gene pool and perhaps take part in what we're trying to do here. Say it's a bit of a hybrid project due to the difficulties of all these regions where they don't cooperate and the government doesn't recognize there's crops there, but they are there. This makes things very difficult. But my partner in Pakistan, we do also have official connection research with the Pakistan government there, but it's at very early stages of what can be all tied up there in Pakistan. So if you would like more information, you can check me out at holistichighlandhemp.com is my company. I've been doing in Scotland, where I've been involved in hemp and CBD industry, but Landrace Warden is a brand of my partner there of this research and development of what we're doing there. And yeah, I hope that's inspired you. We're going to be doing a roundtable discussion at 12:15. I've also got some other nice quality photographs and other printouts and some data and different things. 12:15 we'll be doing a roundtable discussion to dive further into this topic. And thank you very much. I would like to open the room up now, ladies and gentlemen, to any questions. Thank you.